Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual fire training session. My name's Mike. I'm a project coordinator here with Africa Fire Mission, and I'm so happy that all of you took time out of your busy schedules to get some training with us today. We always appreciate how you guys commit your time and invest with your bundles, your Wi-Fi bundles, and things like that to come and see us and participate in today's training. I'll be leading today's training where we're going to talk about the arrival process at a motor vehicle accident. This is part of our a little mini series here about motor vehicle accidents. If you participate in at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40-45 minutes, you'll get a certificate of attendance for today's class. If you're unable to make that, you'll be able to follow us on YouTube, where this will be posted later on today or tomorrow. We'll also invite you to join us afterwards for tea time, where you have a chance to talk about today's class or anything else that may be on your mind. Right now, I'm going to pass it over to Jose. Jose is Africa Fire Mission's fire safety advocate for today's word of encouragement.
Thanks, Mike. I truly appreciate you. Thanks for inviting me. And I will also thank you for you to come at today's training. Thank you for your bundles and also your time. Today, I was just thinking about honor, and I was like, that's one of our pillars in the brotherhood of fire, or should I say the brotherhood and sisterhood of fire. You know, without honor, we really cannot be able to serve the people, because for you to actually go and put out the fire and rescue people's property, you really have to have honor. And as a Christian, I'm pushed to just read something for you guys. You know, like in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9 to 10, it says, honor God by putting him first in all things, in worship, in giving of tithes, offerings, time, and resources. Yeah. And then show us that honor encourages God, and God in turn encourages us through blessings, increase wealth and prosperity. You know, so you can prosper, and in terms of money, you can also prosper in terms of good health, good relationship with your friends at work, and also with your family. You know, so I'm just thinking about honor in the workplaces. Yeah. Sorry about that. There was a call coming in. I was just saying, how do you honor your bosses at work? How do you show them that you like them, or you appreciate them? It can be through a gift. Yeah, it can be through you showing up in time. For example, you honor your fellow colleagues who are getting out from shift by you showing up on time. If the shift change is about 6 p.m., don't show up at 7:30. That shows you don't respect them. Yeah. Honor can be showing up, making sure that you train, so that when you guys go in the fire, you are sure that you're going to rescue this colleague of yours. Yeah. And vice versa, this colleague can rescue you. Yeah. So it is very important, even as we think right now, as you go through, how do I get to honor my boss? How do I get to honor my brother and sister at the firehouse? And how do I get to honor my wife at home, or your girlfriend, for example? You show honor by making sure that you respect them. Yeah, you pay your bills on time, and so many things of the sort. So without further ado, I don't want to take so much of the time. I have so much about honor, but because it's a short time, I will return it back to you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jose. We really appreciate you coming and joining us and sharing those words of encouragement each week. Without further ado here, we're going to jump right into our presentation here. If I can get my screen shared for you all. And as I had said before, We're in a little mini series about responding to motor vehicle accidents. So last week, we talked about some principles of emergency vehicle operation and safe driving and how to get to the scene. So in today's class, we're going to talk about what we do once we get there. The majority of the time we're going to spend here, we're going to be talking about apparatus placement and how we can make that scene safe for us. And then after we have that completed, we're just going to touch briefly on sizing up the scene and the basics of vehicle stabilization. And then next week, we're going to move into extrication. All right. So fire apparatus placement. When we think about where to place our fire apparatus or our ambulances, or even, this applies to law enforcement as well. We need to position our apparatus in such a manner that we expect someone to crash into our vehicles, right? We expect that the traffic that's out there is trying to hit us. So everything that we do, we want to set up, sort of that safe zone. We want to place them in such a way that they're visible to traffic. And we want to place them in such a way that it protects not only us while we're working on the scene, but those other vehicles or other people that may be out there involved in the incident as well. And, your fire brigade should have some sort of policy or procedure that they can use to set up these incident scenes, right? To have some sort of a policy about how we place our apparatus. One thing that I want to note for you all, and with a little bit of apology, we'll watch a video a little bit later, and everything is sort of opposite for you guys, because you guys are driving on the opposite side of the road compared to what we do. So when I do show some drawings or some things here, just everything's sort of the mirror image for most of you guys, right? As we arrive on the scene, of course, we want to evaluate that scene for different hazards and what hazards are available there, or what hazards are out there to harm us while we're trying to respond to this incident. And of course, we don't want to become part of the problem, so we want to keep ourselves nice and safe. The hazards that are out there, careless or impaired drivers. And of course, if it's anything like it is here, people are paying less attention. They've got phones in the vehicles to distract them. They've got their families with them. They're not paying attention. Maybe a noisy children or something. So people are not paying attention the way they usually do. And of course, there's always that concern with your impaired drivers that are under the influence of some sort of drugs or alcohol that may be out there as a danger to you. Hazardous road conditions, just the condition of the road itself, the quality of the road itself can be a hazard to you as a responder out there. You all are fortunate that you don't have to deal with snow the way we do. In my area, we just had some snow again yesterday. But heavy rains, flooding, mudslides, things like that, are all things that can impact you as you're out there. And the volume of traffic. Everyone knows that traffic is getting more and more as we see as development occurs and we get large highways put in. I'm thinking of that new highway in Nairobi that's come in there, presents those new challenges to us. And just any time that we do have an incident, right, you get that altered traffic pattern where people are trying to avoid the accident and what kind of hazards that may pose to you. When we park our apparatus at the scene, once again, whether we're talking about an ambulance or a fire truck, we want to park it in such a way that it reduces the chance that that truck's going to be struck by oncoming traffic. Not only oncoming traffic that's coming towards you, but traffic that's approaching the scene from behind you. We want to park it such a way that it shields us and provides this work area. The idea behind this being that if someone were to crash into our fire truck and push our fire truck, we'll talk about positioning of the wheels on the fire truck and how we can position that so that the truck gets moved away if it's struck by a vehicle. And we wanted to create this shadow area behind us in the work scene where we can be safe and protected from any traffic that may not be paying attention, that may be out there coming towards us. We want to park in a location that allows for effective deployment of equipment and resources to the incident. That's something that you should be thinking about as you set up your fire truck and where you place some of the equipment on your fire truck. Which side of the truck do you store, let's say, your rescue tools on? Would it be better to have it on one side of the truck compared to the other, based on where you usually position the fire truck in traffic? Simple things like when you exit the fire truck on the scene of an incident, do you exit it on the side there where traffic is passing by, or do you exit on the side where there's no traffic? Okay. Here in the diagram, of course, once again, I'll say, interpret this as you will, depending on which side of the road you may operate your vehicles on. But where you park that fire apparatus or that ambulance may vary on every incident. And there's a couple different things that you have to take into account. You've got to look at what the type of incident is. And, sometimes if we can, we're going to avoid parking on the road at all. If you're called to a motor vehicle accident or traffic incident and the vehicles are off the roadway, is there any reason for us to be out in the roadway? So can we just park off to the side of the road so that we're not impeding traffic in any way? The type of road, based on the type of road, the intersection that we're at. Are we on a highway where there's only traffic flowing one way? Or are we on a two-lane road where we've got traffic coming at us from both directions? There's lots of traffic circles. Traffic circles, when you've got an accident within a traffic circle, that poses all sorts of interesting problems trying to direct traffic and where to park your apparatus so that you're safe. And then you've got to factor in other surroundings. If we're talking about an incident that involves a fuel tanker, is there spilled petrol or something? Where do we position our apparatus so that we're not parking in a hazard zone? Basic principles, like I mentioned before, if you can park off the roadway, do that. Park off the roadway, let traffic flow the way it normally does through there. We don't want to impede traffic. When we impede the traffic, that increases the hazards for us, as well as creates the opportunity for what we would call a secondary accident that may happen in the traffic backup behind us. If we need to, if we decide that we have to park in the roadway, maybe we need to close the roadway completely, depending on the type of incident. And some incidents here, if the traffic incident involves a fatality, the highway or the road that takes place on will be closed for quite a while an investigation is done by our law enforcement, and they do what's called the scene reconstruction and take all sorts of measurements and things like that. So if we need to, we'll close that highway or that roadway down completely. As we position our apparatus on the scene, we also want to make sure that we're not preventing the other emergency vehicles that may need to get there from accessing the scene and parking in a safe place as well. Some of you may arrive before the ambulance, or the same goes for the ambulance. Whoever's first on scene, make sure you leave room for anybody else that may be coming. Use the apparatus to shield the scene. So you can see in the picture here, and we have a couple of other examples throughout this presentation, you can see how the trucks are parked in such a way that it creates that shadow. And in this particular picture, you can even see an actual shadow based on the angle of the sun there. So if you had traffic coming towards you from the back of that picture towards us, you can see that you've got the fire truck, you've got the ambulance positioned in such a way that those responders back there that are working, looks like they're loading, getting ready to load the patient onto the litter and load them into the ambulance. They're working in that protected area where they can't be struck by oncoming traffic. Shield the patient as we're loading them on the EMS calls. This applies not just to vehicle accidents, but even your routine transports. If it's just a medical call, I know some of you all are operating with the ambulances. So even if it's just an EMS call, be sure you're positioning yourself in such a way that you're not loading the patient out in traffic where they can be struck. Okay. And of course, the last point we have on there, railroad tracks, of course, be cautious. With railroad tracks, we certainly don't want to park any of our apparatus on the railroad tracks. You never know when there may be a train coming through, so that could have tragic consequences. What are some difficulties that we may encounter when we get on to these traffic incidents? Stop traffic is a big one. It makes it difficult for us to navigate to the scene. As traffic gets backed up, we may make it very difficult for us to move our apparatus through and get to the incident scene. I'm sure all of you that are operators out there have experienced the frustration of not being able to move in traffic. So certainly that's a hazard or difficulty just gaining access to the scene due to that stopped traffic. On limited access highways, which is something that I deal with personally, sometimes there's a long distance between places where you can turn around. So these are where we're talking about roadways where you only have one-way traffic moving in a single direction in a divided highway. And those, you may have to go quite a distance. You may see the accident on the other side, but not be able to access it without traveling a distance down the road to get a crossover, to get a turnaround and come back. And then sometimes we may need to travel against the normal flow of traffic. That may mean traveling the wrong way on a one-way road, or traveling, in the opposite lane in which traffic usually travels. And I would caution you to be very, very cautious whenever you're doing that, whenever you're traveling against that normal flow of traffic. That really puts you and your whole crew in a lot of danger. So I try to limit that as much as we can, and try to avoid doing that if at all possible. We talked a little bit last week about warning devices. I'll just touch on those very briefly here one more time. Be sure as you're responding to those calls to use your warning devices, but also I would remind you that there are some departments that when they get up on a highway, they actually turn their lights off, turn the warning devices off when they're on those high-speed highways where where traffic is moving rather quickly, and sometimes it's difficult to keep up. Sometimes it's better to just turn those warning devices on until you get closer to the scene. Why do we do that? The next point really touches on that. Some of our fire trucks certainly are not the fastest vehicles out there on the roadway. So they're going to be slower than other vehicles that are out there, which causes, can cause some issues, right? So we want to use our lights and our sirens as best we can to alert those other vehicles that we're coming, to try to get their attention. But then the result of that is sometimes people see those lights in their mirrors, or they hear those sirens and they slow down, or they come to a stop, and that poses some dangers to us as well. So maybe a reason why up on the highway or these limited access roads, maybe we want to turn those warning devices off until we get to the scene. So how do we decide whether we're going to, close traffic? Well, do we stop the flow of traffic? It would be great if we could always let traffic flow normally when we get on these incidents, but there are times where we need that space to operate. And when we need that space to operate, we want to close the full lane next to the incident. Be sure that we're giving ourselves plenty of space. Here you can see in this particular picture where they're using a ladder truck in their vehicle accident responses, because it's a large, heavy vehicle and it's providing good blocking. So it's parked at the rear of the incident scene. You've got some law enforcement vehicles, some police vehicles in front of it, maybe a chief's vehicle. And we're putting that ambulance out in the front past the incident if we can. Shielding with the apparatus, once again, I said it before, you should always park in such a manner that you expect your apparatus to get struck by another vehicle. So we want to put that vehicle between the traffic that's coming towards us in the work area, whichever direction that's flowing, so that it provides that protection for us if someone does crash into it. We want to try to park at a 45-degree angle. So we want to, by parking on that 45-degree angle, it makes our fire apparatus bigger. It provides more coverage. It blocks off more of the roadway, providing a safer place for us to work. And then I hinted at it a little bit before. We want to turn those front wheels and we want to angle them. We want to turn that steering wheel so that we're angling those front wheels away from the work area, so that if someone crashes into into the rear of the fire truck, that it will steer away from the scene and won't push into us and run us over. Here's just a little diagram to show you. They're spacing things out quite a bit. You're parking your apparatus. Notice how they're parked on an angle so that they're taking up plenty of space. In this particular incident, they're closing 2 lanes of traffic, and they've got these warning cones out there to let traffic know which way you want them to move. Just something I'll mention to you all, if you were to wanted to learn more about traffic control and maybe you're having trouble sleeping, and you'd like to do some boring reading, there's this book by the United States Department of Transportation's Federal Highway Administration. It's called The Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It's a really big, thick book that explains all about proper ways to divert traffic, details, signs, all sorts of things. It does have some valuable information in there. It's a good reference material, and maybe to review some of those things would provide you with some insight as to how you can better set up your traffic control. What are our goals as we try to control traffic operating around our emergency scene? They're simple. We're going to try to make things safer. Safe for us, the responders, safe for the people that were involved in the accident. The second one is really key, keeping traffic flowing as smoothly as possible. And sometimes we think, well, we're out here working and so we want to make things safe for us. So we're just going to shut this traffic down. But remember that whenever you stop that normal flow of traffic, you're increasing that probability that there's going to be some sort of a secondary accident as vehicles approach from behind and aren't expecting that stopped traffic. And that's the big thing there. We try to prevent those secondary crashes. How do we prevent those? That's by keeping that traffic moving if we can. Parts of the traffic incident management. As we look at our scene, there's a few things that we want to set up. The first is an advanced warning area. And I know for a lot of you, this is difficult to get set up and get established. But we're trying to place some sort of a sign far down the road out in front of the incident that may warn people that there's an accident ahead, or placing a vehicle down the road just sitting there with its lights on so that it catches people's attention and realizes that there's something else going on up ahead they maybe need to be cautious of. The next area is the transition area. And this is where we make our lane changes. This is where we're directing traffic away from the incident scene and where we're directing them away from the normal flow of traffic. It's what we call our transition area. We try to make that as large as we can. I know that poses difficulty for a lot of you. You don't have access to a bunch of traffic cones and things like that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. After we move through the transition zone there, we're in the activity area, what we would call the hot zone. This is where we're working and where we're operating. This is within the shadow of our apparatus where we're protected. And then we still need some sort of a termination area out further past, an organized way that lets folks know that it's okay to move their vehicles back into the lane and that they've moved through our incident. Here we've got a little diagram that shows you what I was talking about there. So we've got down at the bottom, we've got our advanced warning area where we may have a sign or two, or someone standing there with a torch, or some means of alerting people to slow down. We have this transition area where we're moving traffic out of the lane. Some in our activity area, we've got that buffer space and that incident space where we're actually going to be out there working on the patient. And then a shorter transition area in the rear end that we call the termination area. Lighting, something to think about. In the past, we used to think that we wanted as many lights as we could have on our fire trucks to make them as visible as possible. But studies have shown us that, especially at nighttime, too many warning lights can be confusing to traffic or can blind them, and they don't know which way they're supposed to go. And remember that those lights provide a warning, but they don't actually control the traffic in any way. So we've got to be cautious as we're operating out there. Be cautious that we're not using too many lights, that we're not blinding anyone. If we've got white lights on our fire trucks, we'd like to turn those white lights off at nighttime. We'd like to turn those headlights off unless we need them to light up the area, so that we're not blinding the traffic that's approaching us. Once again, we talk about that advanced warning area. We will mention that using cones or using a sign that says, vehicle accident ahead or something to that effect is safer than putting vehicles or people standing out there serving as your advanced warning. So if you have that option available to you for that advanced warning sign, I would encourage you to find something to make that work. I mentioned this before, turn off any forward facing or otherwise blinding lights. One of the newer trends that they're thinking about is that you only use your amber or your yellow lights on your apparatus at nighttime. Those red lights, when traffic people out driving see those red lights, they look like brake lights, and typically you follow those brake lights. That's you're following the vehicle in front of you at nighttime, so you're following those red lights. So they found that some people that aren't paying attention may be more prone to crashing directly into your fire truck because they see those red lights and they think, I'm just following the vehicle in front of us. Okay. High visibility markings. This is a new trend to some extent. With our fire apparatus, we put these reflective chevrons on the rear of our vehicles. Any kind of reflective or high visibility markers that we can place on our apparatus to make it visible. These are sometimes more effective, especially at nighttime, than our warning lights are, because they don't blind vehicles, but they catch everyone's attention. Those are important things to maintain on our apparatus. If we need to use flood lighting or scene lighting, be cautious how you direct those lights. Be cautious that you're not shining those into the eyes of traffic. Angle them down so that they're not distracting the other drivers, and use those only as needed. While we're out there, once we've got on the scene, we've got our apparatus appropriately placed. We've provided for that shadow area, that safe area for us to work in. What should be wearing? And high visibility clothing is something that's really important. There's all sorts of various safety standards out there for what you should be wearing when you're operating on the roadways. But that's not necessarily available to all of you. It would be great if all of you were outfitted with those, new breakaway, high visibility, retro reflective, fluorescent vests. But that's not the reality. Just something to think about as you're out there operating on the highways, on the roadways, is to think about how visible you are. and what you're wearing, and if you don't have, you know, official reflective vests available for you, is there some type of brightly colored clothing that you can wear to make yourself more visible while you're operating out on the highway? Certainly wearing a uniform with dark colors at nighttime makes your visibility very low when you're operating out on the highway. Okay? So be cautious about what you're wearing. There's various classes of these safety vests, up to and including these full outfits, the whole 9 yards, the trousers, the tunics, everything reflective, bright colors. Yeah, so a lot of stuff out there and available, sometimes at a fairly low cost. I encourage you all to take a look into that and see what may be available. We're going to take a quick look, I hope, at this video, and let me know.
If the judgment is that linear positioning is appropriate, it's typically executed as follows. The response vehicle is parked in a straight line directly upstream of the first incident vehicle within the same lane. Sufficient space should be left between the responder vehicle and any incident vehicles so that the responder vehicle will not hit the incident vehicles in the event it's struck by oncoming traffic. Once the blocking vehicle is parked, the wheels must be cut to their critical wheel angle so that if struck from the rear, the responder vehicle is not pushed into the work area. Please note that for police vehicles on traffic stops, studies have concluded that the following recommended configuration is optimal, as described in Law Enforcement Stops and Safety Subcommittee Staff Study 2004. Patrol vehicle angle, 0 degrees. Patrol vehicle steering, minus 25 degrees. Patrol vehicle offset, 50%. Patrol vehicle distance, 15 feet. In some situations, the response vehicle may be parked with a slight block, meaning a slight angle. This slight block does not close additional lanes. A slight block to the left or to the right closes that lane equally. If possible, select the slight block direction that indicates to approaching traffic which direction to merge. Lane closure is an integral part of block positioning. It's important that responders understand that closing lanes negatively affects commerce, costs governments and companies money, delays drivers, and can result in secondary collisions occurring in the back of traffic trying to get past the incident scene. Lane closure is often necessary to protect responders from being struck. Lane closure can actually contribute to quicker clearance of the incident because responders have more room to work and can remain focused on their response tasks. Safe Practices for Traffic Incident Responders advises taking only as many lanes as you need for only as long as you need them. As the incident is cleared, lanes can be progressively reopened. The rule of thumb when using block positioning is lane plus 1, with the shoulder counting as a lane. Be aware that the plus 1 lane may actually be clear of the incident. The purpose of taking that additional lane or lanes is to give responders room to work safely and efficiently by creating an adequate buffer space between those who are feet on the street and the moving traffic. This is especially important in incidents where fire suppression or patient care activities are needed. Here's just one example of the importance of lane plus 1. Remember that every incident is different, and it's up to the appropriate personnel to determine what lanes should be closed and when to reopen them. These images show many different examples of how block positioning can be properly implemented at the scene. At the most basic level, block positioning uses response vehicles, typically but not exclusively fire apparatus, parked at an angle to the lanes of traffic to create a physical barrier between upstream traffic and the work area, thereby halting the flow of moving traffic in one or more lanes. How and where this block is positioned is influenced by many factors, including the characteristics of the incident, lane location of the incident, type of roadway, visibility, weather conditions, traffic volume and speed, response needs, and available apparatus. Let's focus on how the block positioning is done. Block positioning can be done by any response vehicle. In most cases, the first arriving vehicle executes the block. If this initial block is a smaller vehicle, like a police cruiser or an ambulance, it's often replaced with heavier apparatus, such as a fire truck, once that unit arrives. Heavier apparatus provide more protection because they move less when struck and better handle impacts from larger vehicles. In the case of an ambulance that's the initial arriving unit and therefore the initial blocking vehicle, patient care may take place. But patients should not be loaded in until another response vehicle has assumed a blocking position upstream of the ambulance to protect its loading zone from exposure to oncoming traffic. For high-speed, multi-lane divided highway traffic incident responses, many jurisdictions dispatch a second fire apparatus, typically a fire department pumper, ladder truck, or tanker because of their size and weight. This second apparatus has the primary function of acting as the blocking vehicle, not working the scene. This apparatus typically positions in a block to the left or block to the right, approximately 100 feet upstream of the units working at the incident scene in most situations. This second unit, however, must take into consideration reasons why the approaching motorist's line of sight to the incident would be impaired and adjust the unit's position accordingly. The supervisor of this second arriving unit considers hills, curves, bad weather, or any other roadway obstruction feature and positions appropriately. Parking more than 300 feet upstream is not recommended due to the danger of motorists cutting back in before actually passing the incident. This apparatus provides protection and early advance warning of the incident ahead, critical when traffic is traveling at fast highway speeds. Blocking vehicles are parked upstream of the incident between the buffer space and the workspace. Their presence creates a shadow, safe work area at the incident workspace location. Blocking vehicles are typically preceded by advance warning measures, and in and of themselves they provide some advance warning through visibility, lights, chevrons, and arrow boards. Blocking vehicles are parked at an angle so approaching traffic understands that the blocking vehicle is stopped and parked. It's more difficult to identify whether a vehicle is moving when it's parked in a linear position. Block positioning vehicles can be parked block to the left, meaning anchored towards the median, or block to the right, meaning anchored towards the outside shoulder. This simply refers to the angle or direction that the blocking vehicle is set, front to the left or front to the right. The selection of block to the left or block to the right depends on the incident, where the unit is parked in the roadway, and how it will be utilized while blocking. Factors to consider include whether equipment on the blocking vehicle will have to be accessed for response operations, and if so, what equipment and where is it located on the apparatus. This may require positioning the vehicle on the opposite side of oncoming traffic. The direction of oncoming traffic, with an eye toward optimizing traffic flow as advised in the latest issue of the National MUTCD and/or your state's MUTCD. Giving first responders accessing the vehicle the most protection as they operate onboard equipment like the pump, retrieve items, and enter and exit the vehicle. The location of the incident, visibility, and the needs and parking requirements of other response vehicles expected to arrive. Remember that, all things being equal, If the block can place the blocking vehicle physically in a direction or angle that you want the motorist to merge from one lane to another, then choose that blocking position. The degree of the angle should be chosen to properly block the number of lanes required and provide the most protection to those at the incident scene. Once the blocking vehicle is parked, the wheels must be cut to their critical wheel angle so that, if struck from the rear, the responder vehicle is not pushed into the work area. This is achieved by turning the steering wheel all the way to the left or all the way to the right, whichever direction turns the wheels away from the protected activity area. The vehicle operator now must set the parking brake and initiate stationary light shedding procedures according to NFPA standards, department protocol, and apparatus capabilities. Note that a wheel chock should be set as well once the vehicle has been safely exited. Block positioning can be used on any type of roadway. Let's look at an example of a two-lane rural road. In this scenario, two vehicles have crashed in the southbound lane. If the first arriving response vehicle, in this case a fire engine, approaches traveling south, it can be positioned blocked to the left, as shown here, by simply pulling up at the proper angle to block the shoulder and the single lane. If the fire engine were to approach traveling north, it can assume this same position upstream on the southbound side by simply pulling across the yellow line with its front toward the shoulder instead of toward the northbound lane. More than one vehicle can be used in block positioning. For example, other vehicles, such as police cars, can be used upstream of the main block to provide additional advance warning and further slow traffic. For incidents of longer duration, safety patrols and/or DOT vehicles may become involved in providing either additional blocking/advance warning or in replacing working or departing apparatus as the blocking vehicle. Once blocking vehicles are parked, responders must know how to safely exit and work around them. Each agency should have procedures for safe execution of these actions. This last point is especially important if the blocking vehicle is actively working the scene, such as a fire engine engaged in fire suppression operations. When operating at the scene around a blocking vehicle, it's important to recognize that the blocking position creates a zero buffer hazard area. This means that when the responder passes by the blocking vehicle at the furthermost point of the angle, which is typically the front left or front right corner of the blocker, there's very little room to walk where the approaching traffic comes close to the blocking vehicle. There's almost no room to maneuver or escape in this space. Here is what can happen. To safely pass through this zero buffer area, approach from the protected side, stop at each corner and check for approaching traffic. If it's clear, proceed along the unit as closely to the blocking vehicle as possible. Perform the tasks such as retrieving equipment while constantly checking for approaching traffic. Move to the protected side of the vehicle once the task is complete, rather than go back through the zero buffer area. Do not turn your back to moving traffic. Remain exposed to traffic for as short a time as possible. The angle in block positioning creates a shadow immediately downstream of the block. This imaginary shadow provides a work area where responders can perform their duties in an environment protected from traffic. Here we see how all this comes together into an ideal positioning scheme at this particular incident. The first responding vehicle, a police cruiser, initially positions the unit in a blocking posture and radios incident details to the other responding units. The fire truck arrives next. The fire apparatus is longer, larger, and heavier weight than the police car. The fire apparatus assumes an upstream block to the left or block to the right position that creates a lane +1 protected work area for responders. The position and angle are selected to create an appropriately sized work area while still providing access to equipment used in the response. This frees up the police officer and/or firefighters to deploy cones and signs for advance warning and to further protect the work area from traffic cutting back in after the fire truck. When the ambulance arrives, it's able to take advantage of the shadow to park within the work area downstream of the incident with its loading doors angled away from traffic. This enables EMS to have room to work on patients and load them in without stepping into traffic. DOT arrives with its arrow board in the advance warning/transition area to further direct traffic around the blocking vehicles and thus the work area. Finally, when towing and recovery arrives, they're able to park downstream and wait for their opportunity to load and remove disabled vehicles, easily driving away without disturbing the blocking area. This concludes this ResponderSafety.com module.
Here in our scene size up. So now we've arrived on scene and we have placed our apparatus where we need to. We've got a safe scene, a safe area for us to operate in. So now we begin that scene size up, and scene size up is an important thing. We want to do this on every incident that we go to. Obviously, we realize the importance of it when we're operating at something like a structure fire, where we can evaluate the different hazards that are there and begin to make our game plan. But sometimes we don't think that's as necessary when we do incidents like a vehicle accident, but the scene size up is still really important. As we arrive on the scene, we're looking for various hazards that might be available. And of course, we're communicating these hazards as we size up this scene. We want to communicate all of this information to everyone that's arriving on the scene so that they know what type of hazards are there. And obviously there's lots of hazards that may be present, and hazards not just for us, but hazards for the patients that are involved in the accident. Is the vehicle smoking? Is the vehicle beginning to catch fire? Is there fuel spilled? What other hazards are present? Are there environmental hazards that we may need to be cautious of? What different hazards are out there and available to us? How many vehicles are involved? Sometimes it's not as easy to determine how many vehicles are involved in an incident. Sometimes a vehicle that's involved in the incident may continue traveling down the roadway for quite some distance. So get an accounting of how many vehicles are involved. What about the number of patients that are involved? You need to quickly begin to evaluate, are the patients or the victims of the accident trapped in the vehicle? Are we going to need to perform some sort of an extrication? What type of resources are needed? Sometimes we have an ambulance responding with us. Other times you may not have an ambulance available. So how do we deal with those injured patients? I know from talking with some of you that there are times that there's no ambulances available, that you may be out there responding on your own and that you've got injured vehicles. So how do we arrange for some sort of a resource to take these injured folks to the hospital? How can we arrange for that? Do we need to call for an ambulance? Do we need to look for some sort of a bystander that we may be able to utilize to take someone that's injured for the medical help that they need? What other resources do you need? Do you need the police to come out and assist you with traffic control? Sometimes on these incidents along the highways, there may be damage to the highway structure. There may be damage to the road. There may be a need to notify whoever's responsible for the maintenance of those roads about the incident and try to get them to respond back out to the scene where you're operating so that they can mitigate any hazards that may have been created by the incident. Okay. So once we get on the scene, we've done that size up, we've notified any of those extra resources that we need. We've told everyone on the scene what we do. We've developed our plan. Are we going to perform an extrication? Are we going to use hand tools? Are we going to use hydraulic tools? And we'll begin to cover that process next week when we talk about extrication. What do we need to do before we begin? And that's stabilization. Okay. When you go through your fire training, there's lots of focus when we talk about vehicle rescue. There's lots of focus on stabilization, and you'll see those statements that every vehicle must be stabilized, and I would agree with that. But the way that we need to stabilize that vehicle, well, there's different ways that we can do that, and some vehicles may be stable on their own. So part of that stabilization, that initial stabilization process, is just check the vehicle. Is the vehicle move easily, or is it pretty well stabilized and steady as it's sitting there? If we move the vehicle, if we begin to work on the vehicle, whether we're beginning with an extrication or we're attempting to remove the patient from the vehicle, moving that vehicle around too much may cause additional injury to the patients. Of course, anytime there's someone involved in a motor vehicle accident, we're very cautious about cervical spine injuries, injuries to their neck and to their spine. So we want to try to keep their heads stabilized. If you have the resources available, where you have a neck brace, a C-collar that you can put on to stabilize them, we want to try to do that beforehand. A lot of times in some of these incidents, the bystanders may have already grabbed a hold of these people and pulled them out of the vehicle. So sometimes that's not a concern, but we want to be really cautious and very careful with the patient as we try to remove them from the vehicle, that we're not causing them more harm by the way we're handling them. What are some simple ways to stabilize the vehicle? We just want to prevent that vehicle from moving in some way. That could be rolling backwards down a hill. That could be because it's unstable and it's tilting from side to side. So what are some simple ways that we can stabilize that vehicle? Sometimes it's as simple as just blocking the wheels or chalking the wheels, putting a large, heavy object in front or behind of the wheels, whichever way is downhill, to keep it from rolling away. Really quick, really simple. And on many of the accidents that you may be involved with, that's all you really need to do. Another option may be to deflate the tires. If the vehicle's unstable, by letting some of the air out of the tires and letting it settle down and make more contact with the ground, that may be a simple thing that you can do to get that vehicle stabilized and to keep it from moving. As we get a little bit more complex, the next sort of simplest way to stabilize a vehicle is with a step chalk. This is what we call a step chalk, and essentially it's dimensional lumber, and they're stacked in varying lengths to make this sort of wedge shape. And there's two different ways that we can use this to stabilize the vehicle. Ideally, your fire trucks that respond to vehicle accidents, ideally, if you had 4 of these pieced together and waiting to use on your truck, that will stabilize most of the vehicles that you run into. You just simply slide those underneath, like you can see in the image on the right there. You can turn them upside down to the smooth side and just slide them in until they're tight. The image on the right there, they actually have a wedge that they're using to tighten up that. But basically, we're just putting some wood blocks underneath of the sides of the vehicle so that it can't move on the vehicle's built-in suspension system. Okay, step chalks are really simple. That may be something that if you don't have, they do sell these. They make them, out of some sort of high impact plastic material. They're very expensive, but for the most part, a lot of these that you find on your fire apparatus really throughout the world are just made from scrap lumber. that you can find. Cut it in varying lengths and nail them together or screw them together. There's a little strap. If you look at the picture on the left-hand side there, you can see they attach a little piece of webbing as a handle on the back of that. But something simple that you can use some local resources to put together and to build, and really easy, quick way to get a lot of vehicles stabilized. As we progress in the complexity of the tools that we're going to use for that vehicle stabilization, the next one we move into is what we call box cribbing. Again, this is using that dimensional building lumber that may or may not be readily available to you, but here we have a toy that we used to play with as children called Lincoln logs, and they're little pieces of wood that had notches, and you built them together to build little log cabins and little houses with them. And that's essentially the idea that we have here, is that we're using these wood blocks and we're stacking them in such a way underneath of the vehicle to prevent it from moving. We should be a little bit cautious as we're building these. And the picture on the right-hand side that I chose there is obviously from a training session. And you can see they're simulating that they have a patient trapped under the vehicle, and they've built this box crib underneath. It looks like, maybe the boot of the vehicle on the back side there. If you notice, we have a firefighter that's kneeling down there, and that's something that we always caution firefighters to not get down on both of their knees when they're operating, when they're building their cribbing, as they're stabilizing the vehicle. We caution you not to reach underneath of the vehicle, but to use other pieces of that cribbing to push them underneath as you're building it, so that you're not placing yourself in danger reaching underneath of the unstable vehicle. And also we ask you not to get down on your knees like this fella in the picture on the right-hand side. If the vehicle shifts or something, we want you to be, only down on one knee so that you can be agile and that you can get out of the way if need be. The box cribbing works for a lot of situations, but when we get to more extreme, we're going to touch on sort of the final tool that we can use for vehicle stabilization. And these are what we would call a rescue strut. I have not seen many of these in my work in Africa. But as you develop and progress, these are a very valuable tool that you can utilize. They're specifically designed, they're sturdy, they extend into various different lengths, and they're really an invaluable tool to use when you're trying to stabilize vehicles that are in unusual positions, vehicles that are on their roof, vehicles that are on their sides. And you notice with all of these, there's also a strap included, and we're making what you would call like a tensioned buttress system, where you're making a triangle between the vehicle, the strut, and the strap, and you're pulling things together. And when you form that triangle that you can see there in the pictures, that forms a very sturdy base that will prevent those vehicles from tipping over. So I understand, that this may be out of reach. For a lot of you, you don't have access to these struts, but what could you replace this with, and just some sort of a longer piece of lumber or something sturdy that you can use to support a vehicle like this. Use those locally available resources that you have. Do you have any of those ratcheting straps that you can tie on to, some sort of a piece of lumber or something like that you can use in place of a strut to stabilize a vehicle? These are some of the more dangerous positions that you're going to find your vehicles in, whether they're up on their sides or up on their roof. Dangerous for you to operate nearby, the fear that they may roll over and fall on top of you, and then just trying to get those stabilized so that you can get a victim out of the vehicle. Okay. we're starting to get a little bit closer to our end time here. Like I said, that video that I had shared, we'll get that posted for you on our YouTube channel so that you guys can check that out about apparatus placement. That kind of covers our basics of positioning the apparatus as we arrive on the scene, doing our scene size up, where we're making our evaluations as to whether we have the resources we need, what kind of patients we have. We can begin to make our plan to prepare how we're going to finish mitigating that incident. And then our basics of stabilization. Does the vehicle need to be stabilized? Is it steady on its own? If it's not, if it's steady on its own, go ahead and proceed. We don't need to, just because we have these stabilization tools with us doesn't mean we have to use them on every incident. If the vehicle's on all four wheels and it's not moving around, maybe we can just begin to work. So we're going to chalk the wheels, maybe slide some step chalks underneath. If you don't have individual step chalks, anything, blocks, anything that you can use, anything that might be available along the roadside that you could, pile underneath of a vehicle to keep it from moving. My experience with the African firefighters is that you're very resourceful. You're very good at using those locally available materials and using that stuff that you can find nearby to get the job done. So I would encourage you to do that with that stabilization as well. So at this point in time, I'm going to sort of open the floor up to some questions and things like that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Let me change my settings so you all can unmute yourselves. If there's any questions about today's topic, about placement of apparatus, blocking apparatus, sizing up the scene, incident or vehicle stabilization, go ahead and raise your hand or unmute yourselves or ask a question in the chat. Mr. Mustafa, go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chief Mike. Let me thank you for the good presentation that we've had today. Mine is just a simple question. I have ever experienced a scenario where I have seen a vehicle flew from the road, hangs itself on top of the tree. Now, on such a situation, how can we stabilize a vehicle in that scenario? Do we have to use ropes or what? Or do we have any specific instruments that we can use in order to stabilize that kind of a vehicle?
Excellent question, and you found the weak point in my presentation that I had there as I was putting it together. And as soon as you started asking that question, it dawned on me, man, you forgot about that. Yeah, what do we do if we have that vehicle in that precarious situation where maybe it's hanging off of a bridge or it's up in a tree? What do we do? And you hit the nail right on the head there. There's various things you can use. Some sort of a rope. On a lot of our fire trucks, we're carrying some pieces of chain with us that you can use. There's various tools like a come along, which is I don't know if you're familiar with what we would call a come along. It's a sort of ratcheting device with cables on it that you can attach to a piece of chain. Sometimes you've got to find some sort of a steady anchor point. Be cautious. If you're using rope, be sure that it's a very sturdy rope, that it's in good condition, that it's well maintained, and that it's rated with a strength that exceeds the weight of the vehicle that you're going to be tying it to. But yeah, find a sturdy anchor point, anchor it using a chain, using rope. Here, sometimes if you've got a complex incident like that, sometimes here we'll call for a tow truck to come that's typically used to recover the vehicle from the side of the road and maybe utilize the cables and winches that they have on their vehicles to stabilize that. So yeah, you've got the right idea. using, whatever those resources you have available to try to tie it down, to chain it down, to chain it to some sort of sturdy object to prevent it from moving.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Hey, also, is it okay to add the component of what Mustafa was talking about, that risk a lot to save a lot? If you have a car on the tree, but the parties are out of the car, then it's okay to back up and take time to create that plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent point. And we don't want to sort of get that tunnel vision. If the people weren't wearing their seatbelts, if the people got ejected from the vehicle, or if the people are obviously deceased, do we need to put ourselves at risk where there may be a vehicle hanging out of a tree, or the one that I'm always nervous and cautious about in my area, because we've got interstate highways and we've got overpasses and things like that, is those vehicles that may get in an accident, and you've got, or a large commercial vehicle that's hanging off of those bridges or something like that. You've got to be cautious about, what's underneath of those vehicles. Operating underneath of a vehicle that's suspended from somewhere is probably one of the most dangerous situations you're going to place yourself into when you're trying to mitigate a vehicle accident. And as Benson pointed out there, if there's no need to risk yourselves, back off. Sometimes you can even turn that over to a different agency. Let law enforcement, let the police deal with it, right? If there's no emergency, let the police deal with it. Let the road department deal with it, whoever may be responsible for that.
Yep. The last two calls I ran this week had to do with that. The first vehicle hit an electrical pole and the whole ground was energized. So there was a victim, there was a patient in there. So we just told us, sit there. There's nothing we can do right now. You're safe, we are safe. We got the water line ready and we waited for the power company to come. On the second one, we let the whole, I got an ambulance. On the second one, we let the whole car burn down. I know it's difficult in Africa to let somebody's car burn down, but it was on top of an electrical box. So if we engaged with water and electricity, we'll be in trouble. But the victim was able to get out, not be electrocuted, and then the car caught on fire. So we let it burn because there was no reason to risk our life for a vehicle.
Yeah, awesome point. Another great point. Anytime you're dealing with electrical lines of any type, energized electrical lines that may be on a vehicle, as Benson was saying, talk to the person, let them know, hey, you're going to be okay. Because if you have an energized power line that's on top of a vehicle, typically the tires of the vehicle will insulate it from being grounded to the ground and sort of completing that circuit. So you could be perfectly safe inside your vehicle with a live power line on top of it. But if somebody touches that vehicle, they could be electrocuted. To be extremely cautious when there's power lines down. And certainly the way some of the electrical systems that you guys encounter are not nearly as neat and organized as what we're used to here. You've got your illegal electrical connections and power lines running who knows where. Be extremely cautious when your vehicle accident involves those types of things. Any other questions before we wrap up the official part of our training today?
Hello.
Go ahead. Anyone else?
Yes, Chief Mike, it's Mustafa again.
Yes, sir.
In the very same scenario where a vehicle is hanging in a tree, there's a live victim inside. A victim inside is alive, and we want to operate a rescue. Do we have to take a risk again as rescuers, or we wait up until the situation is stabilized, assuming that you're able to communicate with the person inside?
So that goes back to that risk a little to save a little, risk a lot to save a lot, risk nothing to save nothing. So it's all going to be dependent upon the condition of the patient inside the vehicle. if the patient inside the vehicle is injured, but it's not life-threatening injuries, there's no immediate risk, there's the time where we can take that step back and we can, do more work to try to get that stabilized, so that we're not putting ourselves at risk. There are going to be those times where we have to place ourselves at risk in order to save another's life. And that's one of the things that, if you're not aware, you signed up for when you got involved with the fire service. But yeah, once again, Mustafa, you hit it right on the you hit it right on the head there with evaluate it, talk to if you can communicate with the person inside. If they're in a position where they're injured, but they can wait a little bit of time, certainly we're going to take those mitigation steps to stabilize that vehicle as best we can before we're operating. If that person's at risk of of immediate death, then we're going to have to do what we can to try to assist them. But then also realizing, there are times when you may be helpless and there may be absolutely no way that you can assist a person without harming yourself. So those are some of those tough decisions that we have to make sometimes.
Okay, right. I just wanted to know, would it be very necessary for us, assuming we have a ladder truck, and we use the ladder truck to stabilize the vehicle that is hanging in the tree? I don't know how strong those ladders are. If it is a very good idea, then maybe we can explore other avenues. But because we don't know the specifications of those ladders and how they were fixed on the fire truck, I don't know. I would want to get some advice if you have some specifications of the types of materials they use on the ladders, if they are able to handle such kind of pressure.
I can tell you, they are not really designed for any sort of pressure. Those ladders are designed and engineered. They have a specific tip load, and dependent upon the positioning of the ladder, changes what you can tip load those. But typically, it is not a good practice to tie anything off to an aerial ladder of any type. I like the way you're thinking about utilizing that. So there's, again, where is there a locally available resource that you could utilize? Is there something like a crane? A construction crane would be the ideal tool to use in the situation that you're describing there. You've got to be cautious using that. If you were to use an aerial ladder truck like that, and you cause, you face all sorts of issues. You cause damage to that. Of course, it's not easy in Africa to get an aerial ladder repaired, right? So yeah, I would not recommend doing that with the aerial ladder. If you can operate from the aerial ladder to try to remove someone, but I definitely would not attach that ladder to anyone or to any vehicle to stabilize it. At this point in time, we're going to close our official training program here for today. And I thank everyone for attending today's training program. And I would encourage you all to check out our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube Fire Mission, and you'll find all of these trainings available. There's a training playlist available. And also, if you stick around for a few moments in the tea time, I'll post a link to a place where you can get on sort of like a Google Classroom, where you can view today's presentation, write a brief summary about it, and receive a certificate of attendance as well. Just want to thank you all for training. Please encourage you to join us again next week, where we continue our series with vehicle extrication.